and welcome to Sober Mama, the podcast dedicated to supporting women in the quest to ditch the booze. Join your host, sober coach and soon-to-be published author, Rach, as she talks all things alcohol and recovery. From real-life experiences to actionable advice on how to truly live your best sober life. Tune in to hear all about Rach's upcoming book, Sober Mama, and information on how to join her 90-day freedom program. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Hi, welcome back and welcome to Sober Mama. I'm Rachel Shepherd. I'm a UK sober coach and author of Sober Mama, which is due out 28th of December 24. So on the last podcast, I mentioned that I talk about cravings. Before I do that, I don't know if you can even see on this video, but I've got a bruise about here where I had my Botox the other day. And when I got back, my partner said to me, I don't understand it. You don't look like you need Botox. And I said, yes, exactly. That's why you know it's working. And he just can't understand that. He can't understand why I want it because he doesn't think I need it. And this is exactly what happens when we think about cravings. Because when we get a craving, we think we want something. When we want something and we can't have it and we're being deprived of it, it doesn't feel very nice. The problem with alcohol is very early on in the process when you're craving. So I'm talking about the first couple of weeks when you're in withdrawal. Your body actually believes that it needs it. So not only do you think you want to drink, but you also feel compelled to have a drink because your body is thinking about alcohol in the same way that it thinks about food or water. It's desiring it. And imagine trying to say to a very hungry person, don't think about eating. It's impossible. That's all that's going to be on your mind. And in those early days of cravings, and this is why I called this particular podcast, How to Deal with Alcohol Cravings, because often people think, how do I stop alcohol cravings? And you can't. You've got to kind of appreciate that this is some short-term pain and there is no getting around this. The first couple of weeks coming off booze are not very nice. It's entirely tolerable, but that's the reason we end up going for a drink the night after a hangover, right? We don't feel very nice and we want to switch it off. And alcohol does that. It gives you that temporary relief. So you are always, when you come off any drug or, and particularly alcohol, you're going to experience short-term pain. You're going to feel anxious. You're going to feel not particularly happy in your own skin. And it's a case of tolerating it more than anything else, which can be very difficult when you're feeling compelled to take something. So I said in the previous podcast, the brain is hardwired to seek out dopamine. And when you're feeding it alcohol regularly, the brain knows it's getting it from alcohol. So every time you hit a stress point, your body goes, oh, well, the last time I felt like this, alcohol fixed it. So then your thought process suddenly becomes wrapped around obtaining alcohol. And that voice is really hard to ignore because it sounds a lot like you. But it's not. It's the voice of addiction. And the way to identify that is essentially anything your brain is saying that's positive about alcohol is lying to you. And learning to recognize when that is happening is really, really key. So if you can't switch off all these thoughts about alcohol in the early days, and I say the early days because after a few months, this does stop. You might get a craving sporadically, but by and large, the constant thoughts about alcohol only really last in the last month, maybe even 6 weeks. But after that, you do get into the habit of not having alcohol daily. And that becomes, as much as I hate the term, it does become your new normal. So this horrible, intense, anxious-ridden first few weeks, it is short term. I assure you, it does have an end. It's just a case of riding out this rubbish wave at the beginning and knowing it will come to an end. So if I said to you, don't think about alcohol for the first 6 weeks, you're not going to be able to do that. It's the equivalent of me saying to you, don't think about the pink elephant. You're going to think about the pink elephant. It's inevitable. So the way I suggest you deal with this is rather than trying to avoid thinking about alcohol, is to lean into it and learn about alcohol. pick up as much quit literature as you can. Study it like you're studying for a test. It's so important to learn about what alcohol is, what it does to your body, learn about how long it takes to recover, what's going on internally. So much quit lit is so interesting to read. A lot of it's very funny. And if you can do this every time that you get a craving, or before bed every night, whatever it is that, whatever time you can devote to it, it's really going to help you to learn that there is no value in it. And we don't crave something we see no value in. So when we first quit, we've often got a set of beliefs that there are positives to alcohol that we believe to be positive or believe to be benefits. But when you start to unravel all of those, you start to realize that actually all the things that you thought you were getting, you're not. Reduction of anxiety is one of them. We all think, drinking relieves anxiety. It doesn't. It squashes it for a very tiny amount of time, but then the next day you get a huge influx of cortisol and you come bouncing back twice as anxious as you did before. Alcohol reduces anxiety is a lie. So if you can spend your time in the beginning withdrawal stage, learning as much as you can about alcohol, it really does help combat cravings, because all the while you're reading, you're thinking, I don't want to drink. I don't want to be this person. So that was my first tip. Don't try and avoid thinking about it, just lean into it. My second tip is to leave the room. Leave the room, change routine whenever you get a craving. And the reason for that is called the doorway effect. So when we leave the room, and I'm sure you've done it before, particularly if you're a mum, I do this at least once a day. I go upstairs to get something, get up there, and I totally forgot what I've gone up there for. And it's because memory construction is linked to your environment. So when you leave the room and your surroundings change, it affects your memory. So if you've got a craving and your thoughts fixated on that, it's a really good thing to do to completely change location and distract yourself with anything, be it something fun. If you've got something fun to do, it could just be, right, I'm going to use this opportunity to put the laundry away and focus on a task. But leave the room and disrupt your routine. So a really good example of this is when I used to drink, I would come in from the school run and I'd be clock watching until about 5 o'clock in the evening, where I'd open a bottle of wine to start cooking dinner. So just coming through the door after the school run, that next hour was a routine every day, which was the build up to me getting that glass of wine. And I needed to completely change what I did then. So I started to get in from school and play board games with the children. And it's a really small shift. But for the time that I was going through withdrawal, it served as a really good distraction to change what I would normally do when I came in and getting ready to get my glass of wine. It just mixed it up. And again, because the memory is linked to kind of external circumstances and what you can see around you, if you change that up, it can affect the way you feel as well. So I found changing routine to be really, really helpful. And as a side note, I stayed away from bars. Now, if you're not getting cravings when you quit and you feel confident, then, crack on. But if you are getting cravings, going to a bar is just making life really, really tough for yourself. Just make life easy and don't bother until you get to the stage where you feel confident and you don't need to do that. Yeah, just make life easy on yourself, basically. And the last thing I've got to do with cravings is a nice one. Is to eat shitloads of sugar, because it sets off the same receptors in the brain for dopamine, not to the same degree. You're not going to feel, like you do after a glass of wine, but it does help to curb cravings. And the reason for that is alcohol has got a shed load of calories in it and a shed load of sugar. So when you withdraw of alcohol, you also withdraw from sugar. And I certainly found that I had insatiable cravings for sugar when I quit drinking. I could not get enough of it. One sitting, I did 27 giant cookies, and I only stopped because I felt like I was going to be sick. I could not get enough sugar, and that lasted for about 6 weeks. So I constantly had Haribo and lollipops and hard candy, anything I could get my hands on that I would have in the car wherever I was to help curb those cravings. And it really, really did work for me. So it's just worth trying. Obviously, if you've got some sort of a health issue like diabetes and you shouldn't be having sugar, this is not good advice. Don't go against what your doctor says. But if you don't have an issue with sugar, even if you are a totally healthy eater, it's all right to have a few weeks where you just go hell for leather with the sugar. You can deal with exercise, nutrition, all of that later. In the first few weeks, all you want to do is stay sober, and everything else can wait. And I know it's easier said than done, but really this does need to be the sole focus for the first few weeks. And you can't tackle everything in one go. It's too easy to want to reinvent your entire self in super quick fashion. But sobriety, it takes a long time to recover. And it is better to take it slowly and focus on one thing at a time. It stops it becoming overwhelming at the end of the day. So yeah, load yourself up with a shed load of Haribo and deal with exercise and nutrition later. The next podcast, I think I'm going to talk about what happens when you quit. So today we've talked about some of that, e.g. cravings and sugar withdrawal. But I'll go through a brief timeline of what happens when you quit, because once you know that timeline, it's a lot easier to navigate, because when you're feeling certain emotions and different things are happening to your body, you can place it on the timeline. You can see how long it is till you get to the end. It's quite a nice tool for thinking, don't want to go back to day zero because I've already got through all these stages. And it's a nice feeling when you can see yourself progressing and there's an end date to it. So I'll talk about that next time. In the meantime, if you do want to learn any more about me, my course, or have a look at my socials, they're all linked on sobermama.co.uk. Thank you so much for listening.